Hello guys, my name is Clerics. I'm a healing officer for Efficient Storm Rage. This is my guild over here. Well, I'm an officer in it, but this is the guild I'm raiding in. Uh, yeah, so I'm a healing officer. I main Mistweaver Monk, but I also used to play Holy Paladin. That was like my main since I started the game. But I found Mistweaver Monk in Shadowlands. I started playing it out of like necessity because my raid leader at the time wanted a monk because we didn't have like the debuff that we apply that gives like physical damage or something like that. And I ended up playing it in Shadowlands. I've always liked the class. I've always had one like max level, but I never got to actually use it anytime in like a raiding environment or progression or anything. And then during Shadowlands, I actually end up maining it. I haven't looked back since because it's actually really fun. That being said, I'm making this video today about like what my guild's plans are going into the next expansion for the War Within. Um, our guild is a CE guild, like cutting edge, meaning we clear the last boss on Mythic. I believe they've been together since like Legion, and they've been killing it. I started with them back in Shadowlands, actually, at the end of Shadowlands ish. Uh, like middle. I started with them in Sanctum. I'm pretty sure. We've had a few Hall of Fame titles together, meaning like the top 100 guilds in a certain area, so like US 100 or whatever. Uh, this was before they made it Horde and Alliance, so that we were always Alliance whenever we got it. So now that they're Horde and Alliance, it's a lot more difficult. You have to be like the top 100 just in general. Uh, so that's my guild. Yeah, so I'm making this video to show what our guild's plans are, but not only our guild, but guilds that have multiple CEs, like cutting edges. Their mindset, their expectations, their prep, what they usually do to going into a new expansion, the resources that we use. Uh, so I'm just showing this, putting this out there to see, if anyone is interested into getting into Mythic progression rating, like what we do, what you have to look forward to. This is the more like semi-hardcore area. This isn't like casual or like super hardcore. We raid 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. So it's not like super crazy, but we do, play together all the time outside of this. Like we play Cataclysm Classic together, do GDQPs and stuff like that. But I just wanted to show a video, of people that might be interested in Mythic raiding, what it's like, being in a guild or being like an officer in a guild that's prepping for an expansion launch. So the first thing I want to go over is getting a roster together. Uh, Nowadays, with all the classes having raid buffs, you need pretty much one of every class to have like a really good roster. That's not composition, by the way. That's just like having one person of each class to make sure they have like the right buffs and debuffs applied to the bosses or to have on the raid. This excludes DKs, even though they don't have like a raid buff though. They do bring grips. Like the DPS DKs bring grips, blood DKs bring mass grips, and they both bring AMZ, which is a very good defensive in raiding. My guild finds out our roster before we go into a new tier or a new expansion by sending out a Google survey. We just go through and we ask everyone like, "Hey, can you please answer this?" It's gonna ask what their character name is, so we know who's answering it. Obviously, we don't want it to be anonymous. It's gonna ask what their main choice is going to be, and it's going to ask what their alt is going to be, because we do something called split rating, and I'll go into that later on. But before I go into split rating, I want to preface by saying that this expansion, unlike the last couple expansions, is going to have a heroic week. Heroic week it just means there's a space between the launch of Mythic and the heroic. So heroic is going to be coming out first. The first raid week is just heroic. That's going to be the max content you can do. The next raid week, the second raid week, is going to be the first week of Mythic raiding. So this gives us an opportunity to do split raiding, gear our characters more efficiently, and prepare for that like first week of of tuning to come around, so we know what classes we're going to be playing, the comp, and everything like that. So I want to go into what is split raiding actually. Split raids are when a team divides itself between alts and mains. Doing this allows the team to funnel gear to mains, which speeds up the gearing process by min-maxing loot distribution. This is because if you had one raid full of mains, every character would be looking for upgrades. However, if you have multiple raids that are half mains, half alts, you don't have to prioritize the alts, you have to prioritize the mains. So, the total amount of gear won't be going to every raider, it would be going to only half the raiders because they're on their mains. And then lastly, like, even though it's a huge pain to set up rosters for this and requires people to level like a second or even third character if you want to go crazy, we just do one main, one alt, so it's just, two split raids. Half mains, half alts, and the second raid is half mains, half alts as well. And I was saying, I think even though it's a pain to level characters, I mean, it's not even really a pain to level characters anymore. You have mop remix and you have like level boosting and stuff now. It's not really hard. But it's very beneficial for like gearing up super fast in like the early weeks of a tier or first, couple weeks of a tier. It gives you that little bit of a bump. We didn't really have it in Dragonflight because Mythic came out at the exact same time, so it was really hard to get like a lot of gear right away because everything was just an upgrade, like, super fast. Everyone wanted everything. But now that there's a heroic week, it makes splits much more valuable. The third thing is going over like our expectations as like a semi-hardcore CE guild. We want all the raiders that are core raiders or whatever to fill up their vault slots for the dungeons and raids. The raid they're naturally gonna get because we're gonna go through with all our core raiders and like 30-man heroic and kill the boss by the end of the week. That's no problem. You're always gonna have that with us. The other one is filling out your dungeon slots for the Great Vault. In the beginning, the first couple weeks, the tuning on the dungeons aren't always like perfect. So of course we're not gonna say like you need to have like the highest keys done, by the end of the week, otherwise you don't get a raid spot or anything like that. That's not how we work. We know that the tuning is gonna be crazy. Some days you're like, you're gonna have trouble with keys. So we say the first couple of weeks, try to have all the dungeon slots filled, all the raid slots filled, but the dungeons, the first couple of weeks, just have it the highest key level you're able to push to. And then later on, once the keys start getting a little bit easier naturally through us gearing it out, maybe around like the third week or so, you should have enough upgrades by then. We'll actually put a requirement of what key level to have done. So by that time, usually 10 is the key level that stops like the max upgrades or whatever. So we'll say, okay, this week we need you to have, how many? 8 dungeons at key level 10. And later on I'll discuss like what resources we use to track that, but that'll be like a requirement we'll have later on in the tier, like a couple weeks in. Add-ons that we use for loot, we use the Raid Loot Council, or RCLC as people know it already. We use it because it gives leadership full control on who they're giving loot to. So it'll have people that aren't on the loot council auto pass, and then the leadership will get the loot taken to their characters, and then from there people will be able to like need roll, greed, whatever, say in the note like what the upgrade is for, how big of an upgrade it is, if they're going to use it for like an off spec, something else like that. It's very valuable so that we're giving loot to the right people. That being said, you'll almost always prioritize DPS the most for gear because you're trying to kill bosses the fastest. And then tanks and healers I have like kind of sort of even for loot priority, and I'm a healer officer and I know I get like loot like last. So your healers just have to be good. But that being said, healers and tanks kind of have the same priority on loot because I take it on like a case by case basis when I'm giving out loot. So an example is like Neltharian's Call trinkets, like this one right here. It's shared between classes, so tanks, DPS, and healers can use it. So after the DPS all get theirs, blah blah blah, they're having fun DPSing, whatever. It comes down to tanks and healers. This gives healers like a better opportunity to do more healing in the raid, and I think that outweighs a tank doing a little bit more damage. So if you're trying to pass like a heal check, let's say you're rotting out on like, Mythic Macmarax. Uh, that was during like, when it was live, it was a pretty rot heavy fight. So having that trinket being able to use with your cooldowns and things like that really helps a lot, HPS wise and numbers wise, to keep your rate up. If you put it on a tank, it just does, a couple thousand more DPS. That's not going to be the same in, in hindsight. So it's something to think about. I would always prioritize DPS first, and then tanks and healers, take it on a case by case basis to see where the loot goes. And then I want to go over like external resources, what we use to determine if something's actually a upgrade for someone. We use something called Raidbots. It's a external third-party website, but it lets DPS sim their gears, like simulation craft. It lets them sim their gear and show numerically like what is an upgrade for them by how much DPS. You can actually see what your top gear is like from your bags and see like what the optimal setup is, the enchants, gems, everything. Or you can even go even further than that and see like what crafted piece would be best for you, what gear you can get from raids and dungeons or PvP that would be an upgrade, and how it ranks compared to everything else that you can get from there. Healers have something similar called QE Live, and it works pretty much the same. I'm going to give an example. I'm going to show you both websites. But it works pretty similarly in the way that it gives a numerical number, HPS or percentage upgrade on certain pieces of gear for healers. So for a long time, healers didn't really have a way of checking what is an upgrade until now. Now this QE Live website actually shows what an upgrade would be, by how much, in what slot, what enchant, what gems. It works the same way as a DPS sim would work in Raidbots. It's just a different website. One of the other last things I wanted to go over was what resources do we use as a guild, like what external websites or whatever. We use something called readycheck.io. I'm just going to go to it on my other monitor here. It lets us show like the rosters for each tier. So this expansion we had, Volts of Incarnates, Amir Drasil, and Aberrus. It lets us show the rosters for each boss and each tier. So let's say we have 4 of the 5 healers on one boss, and we have 5 of 5 on another. The raiders don't even have to ask in advance what the roster is going to be. They just have to go on that website. The roster is already made by the leadership, and they can go see what they need. That website is also very good for showing what items are your best in slot. You can actually see all the items for each boss, and you can go on your character and select which one is a major upgrade, a minor upgrade for off spec, or just BIS. And you can put a note for something like, I'll only use this BIS in dungeons, or I'm only using this to like experiment on certain fights with a certain healing pattern, something like that, a certain build, whatever. Yeah, so that's the one website that we use. Another website that we use is called WoW Audit, and we use that to also track our roster, but it also it has our guild applications in there. So like anyone who applies for our guild, it shows right there. It'll have like their their World of Warcraft armory page, their Warcraft logs like link, and their Raider IO link, and it has like all their information on the application. And another thing it's very useful for is showing a giant Google spreadsheet, and it tracks each raider's volt progression. So it'll say like, my character is cleric, so it'll say that I have, let's say 50 dungeons done or whatever for the first week. It'll say that I have 50 dungeons. This is my volt score. It's like an arbitrary score on how high you're maxing out your great volt slots. So if you have everything maxed, the higher the score. Easy, simple. And if you have someone slacking, it'll say that, like, you know, they only completed 2 dungeons at a certain key level, so their score would be lower. It also shows, it tracks the upgrades that people have tier wise. It'll show what slot each person has for tier and what level. So it'll say like N for normal, H for heroic, M for mythic. This is important for gearing people up. You know, especially during split week, we need to know who has what gear. That way we can track which tier pieces are going to who. So that website really helps a lot for determining where the loot is actually going. And that's it. So if you guys have any questions or feedback, this is, you know, something I'm thinking about doing, is like informational videos for people that are looking into getting into like mythic rating or something like that. But yeah, just let me know. Thanks for watching the video. Bye.